Hey, this is Rabbi Zev Bannett.
And Ariella and
We're here together to share episode 2 of the Embodied Torah series, collaboration between Ariella and I, part of the future of Yesod blocks, trying to take all these Torah concepts and actually put them out into the world in ways that are practical and yet still deep and still profound. We're also excited to be able to do this with you in a video form. So if you're watching this on video, then you already know that. If you're listening as a podcast and you want to watch on video, then head over to YouTube and you can actually get exactly the same content, but with pictures. So that just adds a lot of fun stuff, especially since we're going to be doing exercises to some degree, showing people how to actually do some of this stuff. Is that right, Ariella?
A little bit. Simple stuff in the chair. Don't worry. You don't have to change into your exercise clothing.
Not like big exercises, but just things that involve doing something. So in this episode, we're going to be talking... Actually, Ariella, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you'd like to focus on in this episode?
Well, you brought up the idea, the reality of breath at the end of our last episode, and it is just a huge topic that we have to open up and talk about, because neshama, the breath, what is it?
Right, so I guess the big question to start off is, what is the significance of breathing? Because breathing is something that we all just kind of do, and we do it really without thinking.
Well, it's the first thing that we do. You know, right. When a baby is born, everyone's waiting for that first breath to take place, and if you don't have that first breath, it's panic. It's a horrible tragedy. So we need to be able to breathe to be alive. Right.
So I guess a lot of what we talk about at Yesod blocks is about how the Eitz HaDa'as creates a situation in which we evaluate the world through perceptions, as opposed to seeing things as they are. And breathing is probably the front line of that. It's kind of like when you have a car and your car drives well, then the car just becomes a thing that you're just used to, and you have it and you drive it, and it's great. And then when it breaks down, then you notice it, obviously, and it suddenly becomes very noticeable. And so breathing is probably the first line of, I guess, I don't say defense, but the first line in which that truth of things that are just always there, that are in the background.
It's the first act of independence existence that we do.
Right. And it's also
before a baby is born, all of her needs are met by the mother effortlessly. And suddenly the baby is born and their body there's a cascade of events that take place within milliseconds to allow the baby to take that first breath. And it is automatic. The autonomic nervous system is what is responsible for our breathing. We don't have to thank God. We don't have to think every time we breathe in. My dad had to joke about this woman who used to wear headphones all the time and just say, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out.
A famous joke.
Yes. So thank God we don't have to be thinking about it all the time, or we would accomplish absolutely nothing. But the really interesting thing about breath is that we do have control over it. Go ahead and hold your breath for a second.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't do it for that long.
We can't do it for that long because it's still under the autonomic nervous system's responsibility. So we have yesh lanu negi'ah. We have the ability to have an effect on it, but it's also happening automatically.
Right. I mean, I think it's also interesting just in terms of when you said about we can't really say thank you each time for every breath that we take, because breathing is almost like, if we think about it as we have to replenish our body's ability to do things, essentially. We do that usually with food. When we eat food, we regenerate, parts of our body that are damaged, and we basically are adding new raw material to help rebuild the body in different ways. And breathing is a much more intangible and yet much more significant aspect of replenishing the body's, I guess, energy sources in a certain way. And so with food, we actually
maintaining regulation throughout all the systems, right. The nervous system, everything.
So it's actually much more encompassing, yeah. And it's also much more constant, and with food, we actually have a bracha that we say before to tie the eating of the food to consciousness of Hashem's presence through the particular activity that we're doing, or the particular food that we're eating. And then we also have a special bracha that we usually say after eating, in order to now take the experience of feeling satisfied and feeling like we're rebuilding our body through that, to connect that experience to Hashem. And breathing is so much more primal and so much more fundamental, and there aren't really any brachos. Probably the reason is because it's just so constant that you can't really do it that way. Or maybe it could even be, I can think of a few possibilities why there's no brachos too, but we'll maybe leave that as a different topic by itself. But I guess So, what if you had to like explain to our viewers / listeners, so how to think about breathing in a way that was more deep and profound? So how would you start going about that?
Well, when was the first time you realized that you were breathing?
I don't know. I guess just now.
Just now?
No.
No.
But I am realizing it right now, much more than I was probably 10 minutes ago. So
Right. So most of us are not used to becoming aware of our breath. The fact that we are breathing, the rhythm of our breath, the quality of our breath. I remember the first time I became aware of the fact that I was breathing. Mm-hmm. I was probably around first grade, around when I got my first sitter, which is sitting on that shelf. Love
nice.
It. And Modani, right? Modani lefanecha melech v'kayam shechazalta bi nishmati. And I remember sitting with my mom, and she was like, yeah, neshama, just make sure you're breathing.
Right.
I'm like, what? Wait, that's the same word. What is happening?
Right.
And I remember just laying in bed and wondering, where is my neshama in my body? Where does it exist? And then I was realizing that as I was trying to focus on this, I stopped breathing. I just wasn't breathing. And
right.
then I let this breath flow in through my body, and I'm like, wait a minute. Maybe there's something to this. Maybe by allowing myself to breathe, I'm allowing Hashem's presence to like fill this body that I happen to exist in.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time. I was a weird kid. Just full disclosure.
In general, or in terms of this?
In general. I can own it.
Excellent.
I think I turned out pretty okay.
Yeah.
But
it's good to own that. I think we're all weird kids, but
yeah. Well, we also didn't have like devices in our hands constantly distracting. Right. So like you're bored and
right.
like you just notice like I'm just breathing. What does it mean to be breathing?
Right.
Like it's going in and out, and I feel it in my lungs, but like, oh, suddenly I feel it stuck in my throat. Wow, I'm angry right now, and it's flowing very differently than when I was, happy and just relaxed. And then realizing that when I relaxed the muscles of my jaw to allow that breath to flow the way I knew that it had before, it had a direct impact on my emotional state. I'm like, right. What? This is shifting how I feel, but no, I want to be angry right now, so I'm not going to let that be. And then realizing, wow, if I want to let Hashem in, I can't hold on to this anger. I have to figure out how to let it go. And if I was working directly with the reason that I was angry, with the emotion of anger, there was no way I was willing to let that go. Right. But when I shifted to think about, okay, physically, I don't like this sensation of tension. I don't like that I'm aware that my breath is not flowing, and I know that I have the capacity to shift that. And slowly, as I worked with the physical state of my body and the flow of breath, the energetic body, my emotional state relaxed. But if I had addressed it directly from the breath, I would have shut down.
Right. Yeah. I want to, I guess maybe a good thing to do now, just to sort of explain for a second the neshama concept, because I don't remember if we did this in the last episode. I feel like we probably did a little bit. Just something that I like to always use as a really like snappy example is looking into each other's eyes, because we all do that. And then the purpose of that example usually is to illustrate how no one's really trying to see people's eyeballs or trying to actually see the self, which is usually we describe as the neshama. But the example is actually, it's useful to sort of draw everyone's attention towards something that we're all experiencing, and all human beings are drawn to this invisible, intangible self that is kind of just coming through. And so that's a very cool universal truth about human beings that the Torah has been describing for thousands of years. But it only takes one tiny slice of what I think is the stack of the neshama. And it's in Kabbalah structures, so the neshama is not just this thing that's kind of just coming through the eyes or something. It's actually, there's actually 5 official layers, although it's really the hishtalshalut of them. In other words, the process of them manifesting is seamless. It's not that there's 5 separate layers, but the neshama example, when I say in terms of looking into people's eyes, you could think of that as kind of like the middle layer, because it's really, that's pure consciousness in the sense that there's not really a immediate physical measurable aspect to that. But then there's like the lower areas, what's called the ruach or the nephesh. So that's really going into the areas that the breathing aspect is deeply intertwined with, because the ruach is usually associated with the dynamism of thought and emotion. And then the nephesh is really what we discussed a little bit last time too, was the dynamism of physiology. In other words, like to have different kinds of dynamic sensations. And you actually said a lot of interesting things already, only the beginning of them last time. Maybe we can go into some of that when we talk more about the breathing. But what's really cool about these extra layers, in other words, just like when you look into somebody's eyes, you're looking to see something which is not really what you're seeing. Right. With the lower aspects of the neshama, which is meaning the nephesh and the ruach and things like that. So also you have a similar phenomenon of intangible realities that have physiological correlates. Like as an example, just to talk about emotions, like this was always like a thing I wondered about when I was also much younger. I was like, what really is a feeling exactly? Like I have feelings. I'm angry, I'm upset. I have feelings for someone. I get excited. Like the usage of the word feeling and emotions, like things like that. And we throw the word around a lot. And emotions actually also have 2 sides that are almost like analogous to the eyes and the neshama consciousness. Like there's a physiological change that goes on in the body when we have an emotional shift, but that's not identical or synonymous with the experience that we have of an emotion. In other words, the physical changes that happen in the body when an emotional shift happens, or we can measure those, but what's it like to feel angry? What's the experience of me, the neshama, now being exposed, the self being exposed to the angry sensation that comes out of the physiology of that, or even the sense that you're like, you sleep on your arm and your arm's asleep, and it just means that now it's not oxygenated. In other words, the air that is all around us has not been, which is invisible, somehow when it comes in, we know now chemically how that works, but that doesn't make it any less profound that there's an invisible element that is surrounding us that literally vitalizes and revitalizes our body parts, that now they become unified. Like this and this is all part of one whole, and the unifying aspect is the Avir that essentially we're pulling in. And in Kabbalah also the same, like the one of the most fascinating things that I've read recently when just in exploring some Rav Ashlag's writings about Kabbalah concepts, is that he talks about how the Or, everything is Or Ein Sof. Right. But then there's this process that Hashem basically puts a shield over that to make it that we don't get inundated and overwhelmed and basically washed away by that. And so, but how does the process look? It's not just like a random filter. The way he describes it is, and the Arizal really describes it like this, he takes the Yud of Chachma, whatever that is, and he shoves it in the middle of the Or, and then it basically makes this vacuum of Or in that space, and instead of it being Or, it's Avir. And if you look at the word, like he says, because the word Avir is just Or with a Yud shoved into the middle of it. And so we're in the middle of that. We're literally bathing in the Avir that is actually just this invisible, intangible, it's essentially intangible, and that is at the same time sustaining us and revitalizing us constantly, and allowing us to continue to be unified with our body, that our body parts are not segmented off from each other like when our arm falls asleep or whatever. And so that's the neshama connection. All of that kind of shows you this is like a massive thing that we're living constantly. Like we're bathed in the Or that is blocked from our eyes because of the Avir dynamic of the tzimtzum that we're talking about, and then we pull that into ourselves, which we'll talk more about the mechanics of that in a second, which is like a fascinating thing by itself. Like we're literally like, oh, let me draw from that into my body, and suddenly I'm alive, and suddenly I'm able to be in a way that's, again, like your examples, right? Like you're so much more alive when you're breathing in a way that's really spreading that oxygen into your body effectively and properly. So that's like the neshama connection. It's like so. Once you see all those things, you can't unsee them. It's like, oh wow, we're just breathing Hashem. It's wild.
Yeah. Well, Hashem is breathing us.
Right. So let's take it to that.
We go into the biomechanics of what's happening when we're breathing. So why
don't you tell our viewers that a little bit, like how that works?
Go ahead and take a deep breath for a second.
Yeah.
What muscles did you notice working when you took that breath?
Right. So I mean, I happen to already know some biology things, so I'm gonna give this away. But the diaphragm is the muscle that's at the bottom of the rib cage.
Right. But typically, most people in this modern age, we're using our neck and shoulders. We're using actually our secondary breathing muscles. So exactly, the diaphragm is the main breathing muscle, and we want to be using that when we're breathing. But we hold so much tension. We hold so many patterns of protection and guarding, of pain and fear, that we actually end up relying on these secondary breathing muscles to take a deep breath. A lot of times people lift up their shoulders and their stomach actually goes in when they inhale, right? But if we go back to the way Hashem designed us to function, the diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped muscle, actually lowers when we inhale. And when it lowers, the space, my elbows are connected to the ribs, right? So that space widens. There is a widening, there's an expansion that takes place when we actually take that deep breath. And when the diaphragm lowers, we're lowering the pressure inside the lungs. And then atmospheric pressure is actually greater than the pressure inside of our lungs, and air is vacuumed in. Air is pushed in, right? So, I like thinking about it that Hashem is constantly surrounding us with this gift of breath, this gift of life.
Atmospheric pressure is. He's like trying
to
shove
the
air
right?
at us.
So, but it's, I just said take it, but we actually want to learn how to receive it, because if we're taking it and we're using our secondary breathing muscles, we're restricting the amount of air that's able to flow into the lungs.
Right.
Most people are using maybe 20% of their lung capacity.
Wow, that's wild,
and the lungs are just sitting with stale air.
Right.
But when we allow ourselves to use the diaphragm, which lowers and creates a reality where we are receiving breath, Kabbalah,
right,
then the lungs actually fully receive and are able to fully release. So when I'm working with people who are shallow breathers or reverse breathers, where they're using their secondary breathing muscles, a lot of the work is actually on finding the effort, the strength in the exhale. We have to first figure out what we need to let go of to make space to receive all the brachot that Hashem is constantly offering us.
Right. So what you're basically saying is that it's the direct corollary of the Kabbalah concept that we just shared, but like now it really takes it into a concrete form, that if we're surrounded by Hashem's self, by Hashem's or, and then it's in this intangible form, and then we basically are trying to make room for it to flood in, so that also has a component of, you have to also let things out, and when we breathe, we're actually letting out the things that we're not using.
Exactly.
And so to put the things that are not helpful or that are damaging or that are harmful, essentially to clean them out. And actually, I guess that fits the dynamic of our body in general. We're trying to bring things into our body that are healing it, building it, expanding it, and then trying to release the things that are damaging it and that are toxic to it. And then that's true also on the thought level, and trying to bring thoughts in like that. So it's really all just one. It's like what we're trying to share here is like this stack of the self through the mind, the thoughts, the emotions, the body, that all of them essentially are going through this process of pulling in more and more of what's real, and trying to then straighten out and change the ways that everything is structured to remove the distortions and to remove the damage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's also recognizing that they're all having a direct impact on each other.
Right.
That they're interconnected.
Right, they're all interconnected, because you basically have to become, in general, like when I try to talk about all of these Torah concepts, like just in general Yesod blocks stuff. So what I like to try to, I emphasize it because this is how I think about it myself, is that like the problem with the Eitz Hadas is like it creates pockets of distortion. And pockets of distortion, you think about like in your house, like there's all these little areas, and like even if you clean like a bunch of areas, it doesn't mean that there aren't still pockets somewhere where there's just clumps of dirt and whatever. And so we kind of have to constantly be on the lookout, and not like in a neurotic way, in a very like almost like gently just recognizing that the areas in our mind where we don't really want to go, like those spaces that are a little bit uncomfortable. So that's like where there are pockets of distortion now, that you have to kind of go in there and ask yourself, like, what am I thinking? You know, some area that if I'm uncomfortable about my, I don't know, let's say, when I was growing up, I was worried about I have like a Jewish nose, so I was always a little uncomfortable about that. And it's like, I remember I once had this experience where somebody a little kid in shul, asks his father in front of me. I was like 14. He's like, why does that boy have such a big nose? Now, and I felt uncomfortable. Now, why do I feel uncomfortable? Because I have a perception of my nose as being problematic and not the right way that it should be. And then I don't want to think about that because I don't like that. So what do? I basically pretend that I don't have that nose. Yeah. And it's funny because, right, it's like despite the nose on your face, like I just try not to think about it. And then when that child pointed that out, like in a public way like that, suddenly I had to face this thing that I don't want to think about, and it was right in front of me. And then eventually I kind of like, the more I thought about it, and you see now I'm speaking about it, like, I don't care that I have a particular, right. It's my birthright. My grandfather had a nose like this. My father has a nose like this. So, but then by finding a place like that where you're uncomfortable and then kind of just facing it, and I asked myself questions about it. I thought about my nose. Like I was like, this is like, there's a whole series of thoughts that over time I basically accumulated about it to the point that I wanted it to be that it wasn't because I felt the pain or I knew that there was a problem there. So because I sensed that there was insecurity, I wanted to face it and then basically make it something that was part of me, not pretending that it's not. And then that's essentially all these things, like the distortions of the Yetzer Das create those little pockets.
Yeah.
And so this is one of 1,000 examples. I mean, we have pockets in our body in terms of our breathing, literally, physically, where there are parts of our lungs that you're basically describing that are just not being cleaned.
Have you ever looked at what your lung, I mean, you have because you studied this, but have you ever looked at how big your lungs are inside your body? Like,
it's like they're like this big.
Like they're all the way down at the bottom of your ribs, and you can breathe into the back of your body.
Right.
You can let that movement, that expansion take place. It's not, most people are thinking my lungs are up here. Like, no, they're down here. They're out here on the sides, and we have so much more capacity to receive. But when we disconnect ourselves from different aspects of ourselves, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, we freeze up. We constrict. And I know from my experience, and a lot of the people that I end up working with in my clinic is this disembodiment, this disconnection of I'm in so much pain, so I don't think of myself as the part of me that hurts.
It's like a crisis mode, basically.
Yeah, I can't think about that. And when we allow ourselves to bring awareness back there, even if it makes us a little bit uncomfortable, there's tremendous healing. I had a really powerful experience where I was working with a group of people who are dealing with terminal illness. And there was a man in a wheelchair, and he could not move any part of him except for his head.
Wow. And
he's like, I don't know why I'm here. This yoga.
Like, what's it even gonna do?
Like, what? I can't do anything anyways. I said, you can breathe, and you can imagine. And I invited him to allow himself to imagine his body moving, to guide the breath to all the different parts, exactly as everyone else was instructed. And we did this whole class, and afterwards everyone was sharing about their experience, and he was almost in tears. He said, I hadn't allowed myself to think about my body for so long that I almost forgot that I can experience joy, and it's not just sadness, and it's not just pain. And it was so powerful for him, but he didn't have the opportunity, he didn't have the safety, the encouragement to allow himself to explore it, because this is the part of me that hurts. This is the part of me that doesn't work. This is the part of me that is ugly. This is the part of me that I am supposed to be ashamed of. And we're cutting ourselves off from Hashem's light when we do that.
Right.
And the breath is such a useful and accessible tool to use. And I want to actually just take this opportunity to say something really important about working directly with the breath, because it's not always so simple. On the one hand, it is incredibly accessible and we can all use it and it's an effective tool. If you have experienced trauma or are experiencing trauma, be careful, because the breath, because it is so powerful, has the capacity to trigger trauma memories, and you just want to be mindful. I know I work a lot with people who have PTSD, women who have unfortunately gone through sexual trauma, and the breath is usually one of the last things that we incorporate into the work together. Because first, like we talked about in the last episode, we need to create safety in the body. So actually, I would love to do a little exercise to help us come into the body from a place of safety. So you don't have to stand up. You can stand up if you want to, but if you're sitting, just bring both of your feet onto the ground and become aware of the support that you're receiving, both from the earth and from your chair. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, go ahead and close your eyes. If it's uncomfortable for you to close your eyes, just lower your eyelids so that it's inviting your awareness inward. We're just going to take our hands and bring them to the sides of our heads, just above our ears. And we're just gently pressing just to feel that containment. We're going to take 3 to 5 breaths here, and maybe you can visualize, sense, allow the breath to expand in the space between your hands. And don't worry if you're not feeling it. These are invitations, offerings, noticing what's arising for you without expectation. And then we're going to bring one hand to the back of the head and the other hand to the forehead. We're just kind of holding the head, the brain, our thoughts, and inviting the breath to expand in the space between our hands. Maybe you can notice that containment, holding, support that your hands are providing as you allow your breath to flow with ease, allowing for a depth of breath without creating any tension. And then we're going to keep one hand on the forehead and bring the other hand down to the heart. And again, we're inviting the awareness of the breath to flow, to expand in the space between the hands. Maybe you'll notice different muscles that you can soften to allow that breath to flow with more ease. Maybe you'll notice areas that are resistant. Whatever you're noticing is okay. And then bring the hand from your forehead down to the lower abdomen, inviting the breath to flow between the heart and your gut. Noticing the quality of breath available to you. And then keeping one hand on the lower abdomen, bring the other hand back to the back of the head. Inviting the head, your brain, your thoughts to soften towards the support of the hand. Inviting the breath to flow with ease and without expectations. And when you're ready, let your hands release down and just take a moment to notice what you notice in your body, your breath, your thoughts. So I don't know if you noticed, but the tone of my voice.
Very hypnotic.
Yeah. I could note it. My heartbeat was changing. Everything just settled. And it's a quality of grounding.
Right.
Right? The nervous system was like, wait, my brain doesn't have to be racing and in charge, and I can come back, surrender the control of my mind to the wisdom of my heart, to the wisdom of my gut.
Right.
I can allow a little bit more integration of myself as a whole.
Right.
That deeper breath allows us to be integrated beings instead of what Mark Walsh, the embodiment guy, would call a brain the body is more than a brain taxi.
Nice. Right. A brain taxi. I like that. It's a good term. I guess also just for any, I mean, there's lots of different kinds of, I guess, perceptions people have regarding their body and their body experiences. Like, I kind of just want to throw this out there. There are some people who are very comfortable doing body exercises, like you mentioned. People who have trauma, for example, have a harder time because what you're doing in that kind of exercise, there's a lot of being with yourself.
Yeah.
Which is if things in yourself, if you have dark corners, which you all have some, that are particularly tender. Yeah. So then being with yourself can be difficult. And I also wanted to mention that I think there are some people who like our bodies are frightening sometimes to us because I'm talking about lungs and these muscles. So I think that sometimes thinking of our bodies as what they actually are, we like to think of our bodies as pretty and as they're it's just me. And the das tovara of that is that we get attached and comfortable. It's a preference to think of our bodies not just as taxis, which obviously is like one particular preference side of it, but like as a reliable me that I just use, and that if I get dressed, I fix my hair and like I look good. But inside, there's so much going on, and that can be frightening to even be exposed to that. I mean, I don't want to use any graphic terms like how lungs are a fascinating thing, right?
Yeah,
I don't want to make it too biological, but on the other hand, it's also important to almost like to know the biology of it to some degree, because let's say when you spoke about the muscles of the neck and the shoulders, I remember when I was learning some yoga things like years back. So there's different poses that you can do if you put your hands above your head. So then it allows the air, when you're breathing, it can allow the air to... So the assumption of these exercises is that first you're trying to draw deep within, and then you want to hit 100% lung capacity. So when you expand outwards, that allows the lungs to essentially inflate fully, because doing this causes the ribcage to expand, like you mentioned. So understanding kind of where everything is, biologically, like the diaphragm being down here, and then there's more diaphragm diaphragm tight muscles along the ribs, and then there's also those are the ones that create that vacuum, and then to recognize that they're essentially, these are like I don't know, bags, containers that the lungs are, and to sort of try to be comfortable with that a little bit. In other words, when you're breathing in, to actually almost like to know that your body actually is a biological tool, because it's terrifying sometimes for us, especially when our bodies start to fail, or we see other people's bodies failing, and then we say, wow, this thing, like I'm so at its mercy, and that becomes one of the dark corners of our mind. And so to learn kind of like where things are, and just in this episode, obviously we're focusing on the lungs, but to kind of like to learn the muscles of the neck and the shoulders when we use them to pull air in that way, as opposed to letting air come in. So that's intrinsically entangled with our personal proclivity for surrender. And that's something which is, some of us have a hard time surrendering and actually like letting go and being that way. And so this is the whole exercise. And by the way, if you felt like you had a hard time doing the exercise, or if you didn't want to do it because you said, okay, the exercise is like, I don't need that part, I just want the understanding. So I happen to be, and it's the reason literally why I love that we're doing this together, because if you're listening to Yesod Blocks, you already know that like even though I'm a very intense experiential person too, but like I use my talking and my thinking as a way to apprehend the world intensely. And sometimes that can make it easier to just think about things than to actually live them, and it's more comfortable. And so, and I know a lot of Yesod Blocks listeners have similar tendencies. Not everyone, but some people do. And the ability to actually be in your body and to actually know your body and to actually feel kind of what it's doing is not like a nice thing to do. It's something which is, I would say, necessary from a Torah's place. Not again, we can talk about medical benefits and all these things. From a Torah place, in order to truly become kadosh, in other words, to take all the parts of yourself and integrate them so they all function together and are directed towards Hashem and are receptive of Hashem, so you have to be in touch with your body. And again, not from a stress place like, you better get in touch with your body. I mean, like, to actually start to develop a certain level of self-knowledge and self-awareness of your body and what it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, we've been reading about the Mishkan.
Right.
In these past Parshiot, and we can think about our body as a Mishkan, and we need to understand all the different parts, all the little pegs that need to be, all the curtains, and all the aspects that make up this physical body, so that v'shachanti betocham,
right,
that Hashem can really dwell fully and as effortlessly as possible. Hashem created us to be able to have effortless existence, right?
That's awesome. I never thought about it like that, actually, because this year in the Chumash cash cycle that I'm doing, I'm trying to help people learn the Mishkan Parshios, and I'm going to do the same thing with Vayikra, with the Korbanos, by summarizing. In other words, like Parshas Truma only has 8 things in it. It's like the Aron, the Shulchan, the Menorah, the Kapor, the Paroches, the Mishkan covering, the poles, the Chatzer, and then there's another thing there that I missed. Oh, the Mizbeach and the Choshes. Okay, 8 things, super easy. Because the actual learning of the Parsha is all detail level construction details. And I often had a hard time, obviously, with the fact that like it repeats. You have the same thing again. But what's the difference between Truma Tetzaveh and Vayakal and Pekudei is the Vayas Parshios, where they're now going and doing those things on a detail level. And I think that's actually something which the Torah is trying to convey. In other words, it's saying the detail, and this is in contrast to the Egel. The Egel was like this vague, like, the Medrash says, like they threw the gold in and then this thing popped out. It was like this lump that looked like an Egel. And it's like the most, the way that we think of our bodies. It's just like, it's, again, hopefully not as a lump, but it's like, we think of it very superficially because it's just there. And then here it's like, if you want to construct the vehicle that's going to channel Hashem, you have to construct it with just like when you build a radio. Like radios can't just be like a random piece of metal. There has to be a whole set of components that act to channel and to grab the transmission, the signal, receive it of Hashem, and then of the radio signal, and then broadcast that into the world. And so I think that, again, I never thought of that until you said it, but I think that's actually that I'm going to think about this more, and it'll probably show up in some Chumash Cast episode or something. But if I had to guess why the Torah did that and why there's so much detail level in the Chumash on these things, that's probably why. Because it's obvious. Of course, everything has to be detailed like that. Just we're so used to not thinking about construction of the Mishkan is a body for Hashem, and the Korbanos are parts of you can think of it as the food for the body. There's different discussions of what Korbanos are. But either way, it's so obvious to the Torah that that's how things have to be constructed with precision and detail, that's why it's just like, well, of course we're going to write it this way. Yeah. And I think that has to be what it is. So it's amazing.
It's really exciting. I know that when I'm trying to help someone find more support in their body and in their movement, sometimes I'll be like, can you just notice your big toe and use your big toe to take your step forward? They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, just try it. They're like, how are you noticing my big toe? I'm like, and they're like, oh my God,
big. How are you not noticing it?
That completely changes the experience of the entire movement, the entire source of support and where the effort is coming from. And suddenly it's like, oh, I'm receiving that support instead of like trying to pull myself up.
Right.
And like, is my pinky like this? Is it lengthening? That's going to directly affect my shoulder blade, and which is going to affect this, which is going to, everything is connected. And when we learn how to really tune in to all these details that might put us to sleep in shul, but there's deep wisdom when we're willing to show up. And unfortunately, we often don't really encounter this work, or we don't have the courage to be engaged with it until we don't have any choice.
Right, exactly. Well, it's because it's very proactive. In other words,
I can't breathe for you.
Right, exactly. Everyone is proactive in areas where they have an incentive. In other words, like the perception that you have, if you have a perception of a particular office as your workplace and of a particular person there as your boss, and then there are consequences that you perceive as significant to you, then you're incentivized to be proactive in your thinking and how to come up with solutions for problems that that particular organizational structure is struggling with. So, but things that you don't have a perception of that type of significance within yourself, you just don't pay attention to it. That's what Das Torah literally is. So the key to this is, again, learning Torah at a deep level is what brings our perceptions into accuracy, essentially. And so paying attention to our body is something which is simply, we're challenged intrinsically, because since Das Torah means we just develop taking for granted preference-oriented perceptions, your body is the thing that is always there. In other words, it's like, with Shabbos, the end of Shabbos, like Shabbos energy accumulates throughout Shabbos. That's why the end of Shabbos is the high point of Shabbos, not like the middle or the Friday night. It's like the ending of Shabbos is like, we had the most Shabbos now, kind of like,
fully loaded.
Right. So the body's, it's like every day you're with your body even more. So it's like, it can really go one of two ways. Either from a Das Torah place, you just get more acclimated to it and you see it less and less. Or it's like, the more you're with your body, the more you can learn about your body and develop deeper and deeper perceptions of what it can do. Like you said how you were a weird kid. I was also a weird kid in different ways. And like for me, it was always like, I was like, oh, what if my, like right now I feel like I'm over here. What if I'm over here? Right? And it's like, well, what's I, right? Like I'm over here now. So I almost felt like I had this like dot inside of me that I could just move around. And like that was kind of my point of consciousness. Yeah. And it's like, now it's here, and now it's here, now it's here, and now it's over here. And then it was like, when I learned some of the Kabbalah concepts and I was like exposed to the analogy of, say, Hashem is manifest as all of reality, but there are shields that are in place that block pieces of reality from experiencing themselves as part of that totality. So like, here's my hand, and then if there was a little block over here, so then this could experience itself as separate from the rest of it.
Right.
And I can actually relate to that now, because I can move that dot into my fingertip and be like, oh, that's where I am now. And then we can look at the world around us and think, well, that's actually what everything is from Hashem's standpoint, except that Hashem can have the dot in all places at all times, because we're stuck in the flow of time in a linear sense. So I can only think about one thing at one time. But what if you could think about all things at all times, because you're beyond time, and so all thoughts are simultaneous.
So you're reminding me of one of my favorite breathing techniques that I'd like to use. It's called Starfish Pattern breathing.
Nice. Where
you bring your awareness to your navel center, which was our initial source of sustenance before being born, where we effortlessly received everything that we needed, right? And using our breath, we bring our awareness from our navel center to all of our extremities, one at a time. And you notice, where does my awareness kind of jump?
Right.
Where is it the front? Is it the back? Is it the side? Is it filling my entire being? And can I flow out? Can I flow back to this source? And you do all the limbs, including your head and your tailbone. Those are also extremities.
It's starfish, because you have
starfish.
Five.
We are 6, because we also have our tailbone.
Right. Okay. Nice.
And then once you do all 6 limbs, so to speak, then the final stage is noticing where can it expand simultaneously throughout your entire being, right? And we get, it's a wonderful practice. I have a recording, maybe we'll link it in the for this episode. But we can gain so much information about where we're holding tension, where we're hiding ourselves through the body, and we understand through Chinese medicine and 5-element healing and Kabbalah, different meridians, different areas of holding. Right. Like the liver, kaved, is known for a place of holding anger when it's overworked or neglected. And how does holding anger in your liver affect your physiology? How does it affect the flow of breath?
There's an experience of it, and then that's all part of the whole structure.
Exactly. Yeah. So we can gain so much information by using our breath. And I was just at a shir yesterday, and we mentioned tzaraat. Is tzaraat a blessing or a curse? Right? And there is an aspect of a huge bracha of having tzaraat. That, okay, I know where my work is. Like, right. I know what I need to do. And I like to think of the breath as that. When we become aware of our flow of breath, the quality of breath, where it reaches, we can become aware of where, oh, I'm holding tension there. Can I settle there? And keep in mind, you might want to be doing this with a professional to help make sure that you're staying safe.
Right.
Because the body holds memories, holds emotions, and as we bring the breath to different parts of our body, lots of stuff can come up. So just again, the reminder: if you have experienced trauma, find someone who is trained to work with trauma-sensitive yoga or therapy to explore this. But it is so worthwhile exploring, because that's the whole purpose of why we're here, right? To allow our endless being to shine.
Right. I guess it's also a good part to reinforce and mention again this point that we brought up last time a little bit in terms of things like Chinese medicine, or that these things they're older than today's new age things, in the sense that these are things that you can find in the Gemara. In other words, like these ideas that when we talk about tefillah as an example, so tefillah, the way we think about it now, just sort of reading words out of the Siddur, versus actual tefillah, which is the inner alignment that's a function of words, but also a function of thoughts and focus. And really, like Rashi says, like, Ro fanecha lo filalti, like, lo alal belibi lachshov machshavot. Like, I never thought I'd ever be able to think the thoughts again of seeing you. This is Yaakov talking about, they thought he would never see Yosef again. It's the word is palal. And so sometimes people think of these things as, well, no, there's just, the Torah is this small thing, and there's all these new things, but actually Chazal, this discussion of how the kidneys are the base point for wisdom, like the knowledge of the body, and not just the knowledge of the body in today's medical, biological sense, but awareness of the body, and I mean, just if you look at Maseches Chulin, like these discussions of like biology and physiology, that when you understand that Chazal, especially by looking at the Midrashim and the Zohar, are working with these frameworks of existential foundations that are layering and embedded in all these things. So, and even what we articulated earlier about neshama and Avir and all those things, that Chazal had all of that information. And if these are the experts of these people who are really, really, really fixated almost on how to undo the damage of the Eitz Hadas, like the whole process of Torah learning and Gemara and analysis and all the different things that we see in the Gemara and in the Rishonim, and these are people who their whole focus was how to be with Hashem through the knowledge of the Torah, and they live that by embodying the Torah to such an extent that you can, read some of the writings of somebody like the Ramban, or just the things that are Rabbi Kiva stories in the Gemara and Rabbi Kiva's statements, and this is a level of embodiment that is so integrated and so total that like the thoughts they're thinking are Hashem thoughts, and the things they're feeling are Hashem feelings, and the ways that they're behaving are Hashem behaviors, and that's literally the stack that we're talking about here. And so it's hard for us to imagine, because today Torah is almost like segmented and pigeonholed, but it's actually this mass framework that includes all of this. And so doing this is actually it's not like I keep trying to show, like finding those dark corners is not it's not a bonus. It's not like something that you can just do that's a nice extra thing. Work. It's the whole thing, right? That is the avoda, and it's avoda on all levels, on the asiya, the yitzira, the bria, like every level, the Nephesh, Ruach, Nishama, Chai, Yechida. These are each different layers of being, and they each need to be constant. And it's a lot. It's like carrying like 5 bags at once, and like each one has stuff that's like almost falling out, and like you kind of keep getting all of it. But like the more you do it, the better you get it, until it just becomes natural, and then you're just living Torah. You're embodying Torah.
Exactly.
So yeah.
So much to say.
Yeah, it's intense stuff.
But I think it's going to be for the next episode, talking about tefillah,
right,
and coming into alignment,
right.
and grounding and yielding, and
it's a good preview or parting snippet for next time. You have any ending thoughts you want to share?
So many thoughts. I just want to encourage our listeners, viewers, to explore the effortless breath. So many people come to work with me, and they're like, how am I supposed to breathe properly? Like, what's the best way? I'm like, you are alive. So whatever's continuing to keep you alive, that is the best way right now. And we want to explore, what is my effortless breath? What allows me to receive as much as possible without reaching the place of tension? Because when we reach the place of tension, we're shifting into taking.
Right.
Right? And just bringing our awareness to the effortless breath of how much can I receive right now in this moment? How much can I let go without going into the place of ego, without going into the place of tension? Just bringing our awareness there, it starts to expand it.
Right.
From a place of support and safety and trust, and from the inside out, instead of this is how it's supposed to be and I have to fit into this mold. It's really the foundation of so much of the work that I do, to become familiar with your own personal effortless breath.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an awesome takeaway from the episode. Okay, so first of all, I have to obviously direct everyone. Ariella's website is Yoga with Ariella, so check that out if you want to learn more about what Ariella does and want to join her for some actual involved processes of these types of things, to do it in real life at an individual level. So it's awesome stuff. And of course, also subscribe to Yesod Blocks. If you want to get more access to the Yesod Blocks content, you can head over there, yesodblocks.com.
There's great stuff.
Yeah, Bezrat Hashem. And hopefully, we're in a little bit of a turmoil time in the world right now. So hopefully, even if we don't get to actual shalom, where everybody's living harmoniously, although that would be awesome too, but at least if we could hope for and ask for and try to receive just not conflict and not fighting, and that our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine should also be safe during this difficult time. And we're looking forward to having you guys join us in the next episode. So thanks, everybody, and see you next time.